Britt, your thoughts?
Well, you maybe heard me say earlier that these are very difficult speeches to write because, you're trying to find a balance between trying to be stirring and moving and also to list all the programmatic things you want to do. I thought this talk struck the balance as well as I've ever seen it struck. And, of course, he was tremendously aided by what I would say, I've watched about 40 of these over the years, addresses to joint sessions. The most emotional moment I've ever seen was Ryan Owens' widow standing there receiving the plaudits for her husband and his service and reacting as she did. It was absolutely riveting television. It was a powerful moment, undoubtedly heartfelt on her part. And on that score, of course, his idea of selecting her to be there and recognizing her as she did, and there'd been criticism of the mission and whether, he was duly concerned about it and whether he was blaming others. I think he swept all that away tonight in what was certainly a stunning moment. There are not many unforgettable moments in State of the Union or State of the Union style addresses. This was certainly one that we'll all remember for a long time.
The best speech he ever gave. In fact, this should have been his inaugural address, a version of it. And it would have actually had an effect on the launch of his presidency and vastly reduced the hysteria that has emerged in the country on the left from the disappointed Democrats in reaction to this president. The inaugural address was a speech about carnage in America. It was dark. It also presented an ideology that was pretty radical. It did it honestly, but in a way that would scare a lot of people. And what this was a version of Trumpism, but done in a sober way, in a way that was, I think, very deliberately made to be not offensive. There were, the negativity, we've talked about this, attacks on the press, on his opponents, on Hillary, all these other things he's been doing for a month, all disappeared. And what was left was a very statesman-like speech, straightforward, about what he wants to do, why he wants to do it. And he put all of the things in terms that were sort of acceptable, radical, almost mainstream. For instance, NATO. He came right out and said, we believe in NATO. He added, everybody has to chip in, but it was not done in a dark or accusatory way. So if this is the presidency of Trump, I think he will succeed. If this is an aberration, just a job of performance, he will not. But this is the standard that I think he has now set for himself, and as an American, I hope he lives up to it.
36 years ago, Ronald Reagan reinvented the speech to the joint session of Congress. He was the one who introduced the idea of having people up in the gallery and creating not just a programmatic message, but a deeply emotional message. I think Donald Trump reinvented it again tonight, 36 years later. I thought it was by far the best speech I've ever heard Donald Trump give. It was one of the best speeches in that setting I've ever heard any president give. He certainly kept faith with his base. There were two extraordinary moments. One was when he said, we are going to repeal and replace Obamacare, and you just felt a guttural roar from the Republican side of the aisle. They have been waiting 7 years for a president to say it, and finally tonight, for the first time, a president said that to a session of Congress. On the other hand, he reached out. The other point I was going to make is he also talked about radical Islamic terrorism. I believe that's the first time any president has ever said that from the well of the House. On the other hand, he reached out to Democrats. I thought it was a grace note to begin his speech, talking about that this is Black History Month and condemning the attacks on Jewish community centers and cemeteries and the hate killing or apparent hate killing in Kansas. He also talked about immigration reform. There, he was reaching out to Democrats. You pointed out the extraordinary moment with the widow, but also the moment with a young student who has been terribly disabled, or the young girl who had failed school twice. I want to say this right, but I feel like tonight Donald Trump became the president of the United States. Right. That yes, of course, he got it 38 days ago, 40 days ago when he was sworn in, but so many Democrats didn't recognize him. I think tonight, whether they agree with him or didn't agree with him, he became the president of the United States, and everyone's going to have to accept that.
The best he's ever given. I agree with Chris completely on that. It's the template, really. Save the tape. If it was
Trumpism without the affect. There's nothing scary about it. He spoke slowly. He explained what he believes. As a populist, his views are, by definition, within the mainstream. Very little, I think, even for moderate Democrats to disagree with in that speech. There were some things, Obamacare, but not big things, actually. I mean, a merit-based immigration system, who's against that exactly? I thought the net effect of it, and who knows if Trump will stick to this template going forward, one hopes, but the net effect was to diminish the Democrats in the room. They didn't greet him when he walked in. They didn't applaud when he said we're going to put American interests first.
They left
abroad.
early.
That's exactly right. They groaned when he brought up the victims of immigrant crime, raising the obvious question, whose side are you on exactly? I mean, they didn't do themselves any favors at all. Look, total resistance is valid if the person you're resisting totally is totally reprehensible. But what if he says things you agree with? What if he proposes an infrastructure program that's bigger than the one that Barack Obama proposed, which he just did? I mean, you have to be flexible, actually, in politics, and they're not.
He, without a doubt, sounded a post-partisan tone, which I think was refreshing after, really, this was smash-mouth politics for the last 18, 19, 20 months, and he did it, and he won doing that and having a really tough and forward-leaning stance on all the issues that he cares about. But tonight, I think he set this all to music, if you will. I mean, this was a moment for Americans who kind of only seen one side of Donald Trump to sit back and say, okay, now I understand what he means. We're going to do some type of immigration reform, but we have to base it on a few principles that we can all agree on. Safety for all Americans, focus on our jobs first, make sure that we're not giving special benefits to people who routinely violate our laws once they're here. I mean, those are things that most people can agree on, yet the Democrats found themselves sitting on their hands, even on the issues that they agree with him on, like women entrepreneurship or jobs for Americans. So I think there were some disappointing moments for the Democrats and not really, applauding as much as they should have. And I think Trump looked bigger as a result, which he needed right now, frankly.